इन्द्रियस्येन्द्रियस्यार्थे
इन्द्रियस्येन्द्रियस्यार्थे
रागद्वेषौ व्यवस्थितौ
रागद्वेषौ व्यवस्थितौ
तयोर्न वशमागच्छेत्
तयोर्नवशमागच्छेत्
तौ ह्यस्य परिपन्थिनौ.
तौर्यस्य परिपन्थिनौ.
There are principles to regulate attachment and aversion pertaining to the senses and their objects. One should not come under the control of such attachment and aversion because they are stumbling blocks on the path of self realization. Purport. Those who are in Krishna consciousness are naturally reluctant to engage in material sense gratification. But those who are not in such consciousness should follow the rules and regulations of the revealed scriptures. Unrestricted sense enjoyment is the cause of material engagement. But one who follows the rules and regulations of the revealed scriptures does not become entangled by the sense objects. For example, sex enjoyment is a necessity for the conditioned soul, and sex enjoyment is allowed under the license of marriage ties. According to scriptural injunctions, one is forbidden to engage in sex relationships with any other woman with other than one's wife. All other women are to be considered as one's mother. But in spite of such injunctions, a man is still inclined to have sex relationships with other women. These propensities are to be curbed, otherwise, they will be stumbling blocks on the path of self realization. As long as the material body is there, the necessities of the material body are allowed, but under rules and regulations. And yet, we should not rely upon the control of such allowances. One has to follow those rules and regulations unattached to them, because practice of sense gratification under regulations may also lead one to go astray. As much as there is always a chance of an accident, even on the royal roads, although they may be very carefully maintained, no one can guarantee that there will be no danger even on the safest roads. The sense enjoyment spirit has been current a very long time owing to material association.
Therefore, in spite of regulated sense enjoyment, there is every chance of falling down. Therefore, any attachment for regulated sense enjoyment must also be allowed by all means. Attachment to Krishna consciousness or acting always in the loving service of Krishna detaches one from all kinds of sensory activities. Therefore, no one should try to be detached from Krishna consciousness at any stage of life. The whole purpose of detachment from all kind of sense attachment is untimely and ultimately to become situated on the platform of Krishna consciousness.
मतलब ये बोल रहे हैं कि रेगुलेटेड प्रिंसिपल्स हैं, लेकिन फिर भी उसको इतना ज्यादा ऐसे मत सोचो कि हाँ मैं तो कम ही करती हूँ, क्योंकि कभी भी यू कैन गो एस्ट्रे. जैसे इन्होंने बोला कि ऑन द रॉयल रोड भी एक्सीडेंट्स होते ही हैं, तो इसलिए डोंट टेक इट फॉर ग्रांटेड.
श्रेयन् स्वधर्मो विगुणा परधर्मात् स्व अनुष्ठितात् स्वधर्मे निधनं श्रेय पराधर्मो भयावह.
It is far better to discharge one's prescribed duties, even though faultily, than another's duties perfectly. Destruction in the course of performing one's own duty is better than engaging in another's duties. For to follow another's path is dangerous. One should therefore discharge his prescribed duties in full Krishna consciousness rather than those prescribed for others. Materially, prescribed duties are duties enjoined according to one's psychophysical condition, under the spell of the modes of material nature. Spiritual duties are as ordered by the spiritual master for the transcendental service of Krishna. But whether material or spiritual, one should stick to his prescribed duties even up to death, rather than imitate another's prescribed duties. Duties on the spiritual platform and duties on the material platform may be different, but the principle of following the authorized direction is always good for the performer. When one is under the spell of the modes of material nature, one should follow the prescribed rules for his particular situation and should not imitate others. For example, a Brahmana who is in the mode of goodness is non-violent, whereas a Kshatriya who is in the mode of passion is allowed to be violent. As such, for a Kshatriya, it is better to be vanquished following the rules of violence than to imitate a Brahmana who follows the principles of non-violence. Everyone has to cleanse his heart by a gradual process, not abruptly. However, when one transcends the modes of material nature and is fully situated in Krishna consciousness, he can perform anything and everything under the direction of a bona fide spiritual master. In that complete stage of Krishna consciousness, the Kshatriya may act as a Brahmana or a Brahmana may act as a Kshatriya. In the transcendental stage, the distinctions of the material world do not apply. For example, Vishwamitra was originally a Kshatriya, but later on he acted as a Brahmana. Whereas Parshuram was a Brahman, but later on he acted as a Kshatriya. Being transcendently situated, they would do so. But as long as one is on the material platform, he must perform his duties according to the modes of material nature. At the same time, he must have a full sense of Krishna consciousness.
में दो वर्ड्स बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। एक तो स्वधर्म, स्व मतलब जैसे स्वदेश, कि माय प्रिस्क्राइब ड्यूटीज, अपना, और परधर्म मतलब दूसरे की प्रिस्क्राइब ड्यूटीज, जैसे परदेश। तो अगर हम अपनी ड्यूटी में 19-20 भी काम कर रहे हैं, बेस्ट नहीं दे पा रहे हैं, तो भी बेटर है दूसरे का काम 21 करने से, क्योंकि दूसरे का काम करना इज ऑलवेज फुल ऑफ फियर।
अर्जुन वाच अथा केन प्रयुक्तो यां पापं चरति पुरुषः अनिच्छन् अपि वर्ष्णेय बलद् एव नियोजितः।
ब्यूटीफुल। ये जो श्लोक है इसमें अर्जुन इतना रियल बोल रहे हैं। हम जैसे बोलते हैं ना कि मैं चाहता नहीं हूं ये करना, फिर भी मैं गलत कर देता हूँ। Arjun said, O descendant of Vrishni, by what is one impelled to sinful acts, even unwillingly, as if engaged by force? A living entity, as part and parcel of the Supreme, is originally spiritual, pure, and free from all material contaminations. Therefore, by nature, he is not subject to the sins of the material world. But when he is in contact with the material nature, he acts in many sinful ways without hesitation and sometimes even against his will. As such, Arjun's question to Krishna is very sanguine as to the perverted nature of the living entities. Although the living entity sometimes does not want to act in sin, he is still forced to act. Sinful actions are not, however, impelled by the super soul within, but are due to another cause, as the Lord explains in the next verse.
श्री भगवान वाच काम एषे क्रोध एष रजोगुणा समुद्भव महासानो महापाप्मा विधि एनम इह वैरिणम्।
The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, it is lust only, Arjuna, which is born of contact with the material mode of passion and later transformed into wrath, and which is the all-devouring sinful enemy of this world. Purport. When a living entity comes in contact with the material creation, his eternal love for Krishna is transformed into lust in association with the mode of passion. Or in other words, the sense of love of God becomes transformed into lust as milk in contact with sour tamarind is transformed into yogurt. Then again, when lust is unsatisfied, it turns into wrath. Wrath is transformed into illusion, and illusion continues the material existence. Therefore, lust is the greatest enemy of the living entity, and it is lust only which induces the pure living entity to remain entangled in the material world. Wrath is the manifestation of the mode of ignorance. These modes exhibit themselves as wrath and other corollaries. If therefore the mode of passion, instead of being degraded into the mode of ignorance, is elevated to the mode of goodness by the prescribed method of living and acting, then one can be saved from the degradation of wrath by the spiritual attachment. The Supreme Personality of Godhead expanded himself into many for his ever increasing spiritual bliss, and the living entities are parts and parcels of this spiritual bliss. They also have partial independence, but by misuse of their independence, when the service attitude is transformed into the propensity for sense enjoyment, they come under the sway of lust. This material creation is created by the Lord to give facility to the conditioned souls to fulfill these lustful propensities. And when completely baffled by prolonged lustful activities, the living entities begin to inquire about their real position. This inquiry is the beginning of the Vedanta Sutras, wherein it is said, Athato Brahma Jignasa. One should inquire into the Supreme. And the Supreme is defined in Srimad Bhagavatam as Janmadi Asyata Yato Nyayaditratasaka, or the origin of everything is the Supreme Brahman. Therefore, the origin of lust is also in the Supreme. If therefore lust is transformed into love for the Supreme, or transformed into Krishna consciousness, or in other words, desiring everything for Krishna, then both lust and wrath can be spiritualized. Hanuman, the great servitor of Lord Ram, exhibited his wrath by burning the golden city of Ravan. But by doing so, he became the greatest devotee of Lord. Here also in Bhagavad Gita, the Lord induces Arjun to engage his wrath upon his enemies for the satisfaction of the Lord. Therefore, lust and wrath, when they are employed in Krishna consciousness, become our friends instead of our enemies.
तो बेसिकली यहाँ जो लस्ट बोला है, लस्ट इज नॉट ओनली रोमांटिक थिंग्स, लस्ट इज एनी डिजायर्स विच आर नॉट राइट. जैसे रावण टू फील कि मैं सारे देवताओं को अपने अंदर लाऊंगा, इट्स नॉट द राइट थिंग टू डू. तो ऐसा बोलते हैं कि लस्ट का छोटा भाई है एंगर, तो जहां जहां बड़ा भाई जाएगा द छोटा भाई विल फॉलो. जैसे यहाँ पे बताया है कि इट इज लस्ट ओनली एंड लेटर इट इज ट्रांसफॉर्म्ड इनटू वृथ एंगर. ट्री होता है तो ट्री
अपसाइड डाउन
सीधा है, यहाँ पे वो उल्टा है. तो
रूट्स ऊपर है ना.
हाँ जी. तो जो भी चीजें यहाँ पे मतलब बाद में आएंगी, जो अच्छी चीजें वो बाद में आप उसको खुद से सेल्फ रियलाइजेशन करोगे तो आएगा. जब आप बड़ा पैदा हुए हो तो फिर आप परफेक्ट पैदा नहीं हुए, मतलब आप ऑलरेडी ये सब लेके पैदा हुए हो अपने पुराने स्वभाव.
मतलब अच्छा बनना आपको एफर्ट करना पड़ेगा उसके लिए, राइट.
जैसे मिल्क मतलब चर्न करना है ना, तो हमको चर्न करना है कुछ.
अथाओ ब्रह्म जिज्ञासा,
मतलब इंक्वायर करने के लिए बोल रही.
चाहे लाइफ में जब भी जागो, जब भी आप जैसे बोलो ना अपने प्योरीफाई हो या चर्न करो अपने आप को, जब भी जागो कभी तो जागो, मतलब अथि तो ब्रह्म जिज्ञासा, कभी तो जागो, कभी तो ब्रह्म को जानो.
ध्रुमेन्द्रिया विर्याते वहनिर यथा दर्शो मलेन च यथा हो बेलन वर्तो गर्भस तथा तेन दम आवृतम.
As fire is covered by smoke, as a mirror is covered by dust, or as the embryo is covered by the womb. Embryo is covered by the embryo is covered by the womb. The living entity is similarly covered by different degrees of this lust. Wow. There are 3 degrees of covering of the living entity by which his pure consciousness is obscured. This covering is but lust. Under different manifestations like smoke, fire, dust on the mirror, and the womb about the embryo. When lust is compared to smoke, it is understood that the fire of the living spark can be little perceived. In other words, when the living entity exhibits his Krishna consciousness slightly, he may be likened to the fire covered by smoke. Although fire is necessary, Where there is smoke, there is no overt manifestation of fire in the early stage. This stage is like the beginning of Krishna consciousness. The dust on the mirror refers to a cleansing process of the mirror, of the mind, by so spiritual methods. The best process is to chant the holy name of the Lord. The embryo covered by the womb is an analogy illustrating a helpless position of the child in the womb is so helpless that he cannot even move. The stage of living condition can be compared to that of the trees. The trees are also living entities, but they have been put in such a condition of life by such a great exhibition of lust that they are almost void of all consciousness. The covered mirror is compared to the birds and beasts, and the smoke covered fire is compared to the human being. In the form of a human being, the living entity may receive a little Krishna consciousness, and if he further development, the fire of the spiritual life can be kindled in the human form of life. By careful handling of the smoke in the fire, fire can be made to ablaze. Therefore, the human form of life is the chance for the living entity to escape the entanglement of material existence. In the human form of life, one can conquer the enemy, lust, by cultivation of Krishna consciousness under able guidance.
3 degrees ऑफ कवरिंग ऑफ लस्ट बताया है। तो 3 मतलब ये जो एनालॉजी दिया है, फर्स्ट दिया है ह्यूमन बींग्स के लिए कि स्मोक कवर्ड बाय, तो वो जल्दी हट सकते हैं, मतलब हम अपने आप को जल्दी वी कैन रेज आवर कॉन्शियसनेस लेवल। लेकिन जो एनिमल्स है उनका एक मिरर है जिसपे काफी मतलब डर्टी मिरर है, तो उसको मिटाना थोड़ा डिफिकल्ट है कंपेरेटिवली। और जो ट्रीज है जिनकी कॉन्शियसनेस उनसे भी डिफिकल्ट है क्योंकि वो एक हेल्पलेस बेबी की तरह है, दे कांट इवन मूव, जैसे एक सैक अपसाइड डाउन है।
आवृतं ज्ञाननम् एतेन ज्ञानिनो नित्यवैरिणा कामरूपेण कुन्तेय दुष्पूर्णलेन च. Thus the wise living entity's pure consciousness becomes covered by his eternal enemy in the form of lust, which is never satisfied, which burns like fire. Purport by Divine Grace Prabhupada. It is said in the Manu Smriti that lust cannot be satisfied by any amount of sense enjoyment, just as fire is never extinguished by the constant supply of fuel. In the material world, the center of all activities is sex, and thus the material world is called Maithunya Agraha, or the shackles of sex life. In the ordinary prison house, criminals are kept within bars. Similarly, the criminals who are disobedient to the laws of the Lord are shackled by sex life. Advancement of material civilization on the basis of sense gratification means increasing the duration of material existence of the living entity. Therefore, this lust is the symbol of ignorance by which the living entity is kept within the material world. While one enjoys sense gratification, it may be that there is some feeling of happiness, but actually, that so called feeling of happiness is the ultimate enemy of the sense enjoyer.
हमारा eternal enemy is in the form of lust because it can never be satisfied. Greed तो यही है, the more we get, the more we want.
इंद्रियाणि मनोभूते आस्याधिष्ठानम् उच्यते इति विमोचयन्ति एष ज्ञानिनाम् आवृत्या देहिनाम्.
Since the mind and the intelligence are the sitting places of this lust, through them, lust covers the real knowledge of the living entity and bewilders him. The enemy has captured different strategic positions in the body of the conditioned soul, and therefore, Lord Krishna is giving hints of those places, so that one who wants to conquer the enemy may know where he can be found. Mind is the center of all the activities of the senses, and thus, when we hear about sense objects, the mind generally becomes a reservoir of all ideas of sense gratification, and as a result, the mind and the senses become the repositories of lust. Next, the intelligence department becomes the capital of such lustful propensities. Intelligence is the immediate next door neighbor of the spirit soul. Lusty intelligence influences the spirit soul to acquire the false ego and identify itself with matter. And thus, with the mind and the senses, the spirit soul becomes addicted to enjoying the material senses and mistakes this as true happiness. This false identification of the spirit soul is very nicely explained in the Srimad Bhagavatam 10.84.13. A human being who identifies his body made of three elements with his self, who considers the byproducts of the body to be his kinsmen, who considers the land of birth worshipable, and who goes to the place of pilgrimage simply to take a bath rather than to meet men of transcendental knowledge there, is to be considered like an ass or a cow.
बेसिकली इसमें बता रहे हैं कि जो हमारे सेंसेस हैं वो आपको बता रहे हैं कि क्या चाहिए। जैसे अगर स्मेल आ रही है बहुत अच्छे मीठे की, तो सेंसेस ने माइंड को सिग्नल दिया है कि मीठा खा सकते हैं, और माइंड फिर इंटेलिजेंस को बोल रहा है, और जो इंटेलिजेंस है वो डिसीजन मेकर है कि हाउ कैन आई मेक इट अवेलेबल, कैसे लेना है। अब अगर इंटेलिजेंस ही लस्टी हो गई है तो फॉल्स ईगो, सोल, जो हमारी सोल है वो फॉल्स ईगो में आ जाती है। सो पूरा हमारा कंटामिनेशन हो जाता है, क्योंकि इंटेलिजेंस इज द नेक्स्ट डोर नेबर ऑफ द सोल। तो सेंसेस पे ही कंट्रोल करना काफी मतलब बेस्ट ऑप्शन रहेगा। बेसिकली ये ऐसा बोल रहे हैं कि जो ऐसे लोग हैं जो सिर्फ मान लो अगर गंगा स्नान करने जा रहे हैं सिर्फ अपने पुण्य कमाने के लिए, पाप धोने के लिए, वो कैसे पाप धोएंगे? क्योंकि उनको एक्चुअली पाप धोने हैं तो आगे नहीं करने हैं। नहीं करने की समझ कैसे आएगी जब आप एलिवेटेड लोगों से मिलोगे? अगर आप धाम जा रहे हो, वृंदावन जा रहे हो, लेकिन आप नहीं जा रहे हो जो भी वहां के रसिक जन है उनको मिलने, तो आप सीखोगे कैसे? कुछ आपके दिमाग में कैसे जाएगा? जैसे इंग्लिश में बोलते हैं ना, व्हाट एन एस, तो यहाँ
हाँ,
पे उसको उस तरीके से बोल रहे हैं कि वो एक्चुअली बुद्धू इंसान है जो जा रहा है लेकिन फिर भी वैसे लोगों से वहां जाके नहीं मिल रहा है।
और काऊ में बोला है
एनिमल, काऊ होली है लेकिन काऊ गऊ है ना, गऊ कुछ बोल भी नहीं सकती है। अगर आप कहीं जा रहे हो तो यू हैव टू एक्चुअली रेज योर कॉन्शियसनेस। आपका एम ये होना चाहिए कि आई कम बैक अ बेटर पर्सन।
Yeah.
If you're going to the holy places, you're going to spend your finances also, your time, money, everything.
तस्मात् त्वम् इन्द्रियाणि अदौ नियमा भरतर्षभ पाप्मानं प्रजानीहि एनं ज्ञान विज्ञाननाशनम्.
Therefore, O Arjuna, best of the Bharatas, in the very beginning, curb this great symbol of sin, lust, by regulating the senses, and slay this destroyer of knowledge and self realization. Purport: the Lord advised Arjuna to regulate the senses from the very beginning so that he could curb the greatest sinful enemy, lust, which destroys the urge for self realization and specific knowledge of the self. Jana,
Jana.
Jana,
Jana.
Jana there
Jnana.
refers to knowledge of the self as distinguished from non self, or in other words, knowledge that the spirit soul is not the body. Vijnana refers to specific knowledge of the spirit soul's constitutional position and his relationship to the supreme soul. It is explained thus in the Srimad Bhagavatam. The knowledge of self and supreme self is very confidential and mysterious, but such knowledge and specific realization can be understood if explained with their various aspects of Lord Himself. Bhagavad Gita refers us that general and specific knowledge of the self, the living entities are parts and parcel of the law, and therefore they are simply meant to serve the Lord. This consciousness is called Krishna consciousness. So, from the very beginning of the life, one has to learn that Krishna consciousness, and thereby one may become fully Krishna conscious and act accordingly. Lust is only the perverted reflection of the love of God, which is natural for every living entity. But if one is educated in Krishna consciousness from the very beginning, that natural love of God cannot deteriorate into lust. When love of God deteriorates into lust, it is very difficult to return to the normal condition. Nonetheless, Krishna consciousness is so powerful that even a late beginner can become a lover of God by following the regulative principles of devotional service. So, from any stage of life or from the time of understanding its urgency, one can begin regulating the senses in Krishna consciousness, devotional services of the Lord, and turn the lust into love of God, Godhead, the highest perfectional stage of human life.
यहाँ अर्जेंसी बोला है ना, हर कोई एक्चुअली बोलता है कि क्या ही अर्जेंसी है, मतलब ये सब काम बड़े होके कर लेना, बुढ़े होके कर लेना। बट ऐसे भजन है ना कि भजन करो मस्त जवानी में, बुढ़ापा किसने देखा है। तो हमको इसकी अर्जेंसी लाइफ में समझ ही नहीं आती है इन लाइफ की, कब ये जरूरी है। हम पूरी लाइफ तो ऐसे लाइफ में गंदे डिसीजंस लेके बिता देते हैं, बाद में आके समझते हैं अरे ऐसे नहीं, ऐसे करना चाहिए था। और यहाँ पे इन्होंने बताया है कि जो लस्ट है वो किसको मार रहा है, किसका नाश कर रहा है, ज्ञान का और विज्ञान का, तो नॉलेज का और साइंस का, दोनों को वो डिस्ट्रॉय कर रहा है। सो इट इज बेटर, वो बोल रहे हैं अर्जुन को कि इन द वेरी बिगनिंग दिस कर्ब दिस सिंबल ऑफ लस्ट।
इंद्रियाणि प्रणय अहोर इंद्रियाभय परम मना मानसास्तु परा बुद्धिर यो बुद्धि परातस्तु स.
The working senses are superior to dull matter. Mind is higher than the senses. Intelligence is still higher than the mind. And he, the soul, is even higher than the intelligence. The senses are different outlets for the activities of lust. Lust is resolved within the body, but it is given vent through the senses. Therefore, the senses are superior to the body as a whole. These outlets are not in use when there is superior consciousness or Krishna consciousness. In Krishna consciousness, the soul makes direct connection with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Therefore, the hierarchy of bodily functions as described here ultimately ends in the Supreme Soul. Bodily action means the functions of the senses, and stopping the senses means stopping all bodily actions. But since the mind is active, then even though the body may be silent and at rest, the mind will act as it does during dreaming. But above the mind is the determination of the intelligence, and above the intelligence is the soul proper. If, if therefore the soul is directly engaged with the Supreme, naturally all other subordinates, namely the intelligence, mind, and senses, will be automatically engaged. In the Katha Upanishad, there is a similar passage in which it is said that the objects of sense gratification are superior to the senses and the mind is superior to the sense objects. If therefore the mind is directly engaged in the service of the Lord constantly, then there is no chance. Sorry. Then there is no chance that the senses will become engaged in other ways. This mental attitude has already been explained. Paramam Rashva Nivartati. If the mind is engaged in the transcendental service of the Lord, there is no chance of its being engaged in the lower propensities. In the Atha Upanishad, the soul has been described as Mahan, the great. Therefore, the soul is above all, namely the sense objects, the senses, the mind, and the intelligence. Therefore, directly understanding the constitutional position of the soul is the solution of the whole problem. With intelligence, one has to figure out the constitutional position of the souls and then engage the mind always in Krishna consciousness. That solves the whole problem. A neophyte spiritualist is generally advised to keep aloof from the objects of the senses. But aside from that, one has to strengthen the mind by use of intelligence. If by intelligence one engages one's mind in Krishna consciousness, by complete surrender to the Supreme Personality of Godhead, then automatically the mind becomes stronger, and even though the senses are very strong, like serpents, they will be no more effective than serpents with broken fangs. But even though the soul is the master of intelligence and the mind and the senses, also still, unless it is strengthened by association with Krishna and Krishna consciousness, there is every chance of falling down due to the agitated mind.
ये जो कथा है उपनिषद में हमने अभी समझा ना, तो ये एनालॉजी है बेसिकली कि जो 5 घोड़े हैं उसको 5 सेंसेस बताए, और जो ये रोप्स हैं, ये रोप्स हमारा माइंड है, और जो ये आदमी गाड़ी चला रहा है, ड्राइवर है, वो है हमारी इंटेलिजेंस, और जो पीछे बैठी है वो सोल। तो यहाँ पे सोल इनएक्टिव है, ये डरी हुई है, कुछ कर नहीं रही है, मतलब माइंड ने टेक ओवर कर लिया है, सेंसेस के हिसाब से चल रहे हैं, सारे घोड़े में कोई हार्मनी नहीं है। तो सोल को अवेक होना चाहिए और सोल को कंट्रोल करना चाहिए ये सब चीजों को, ड्राइवर को भी, रोप को भी, घोड़ों को भी। लेकिन यहाँ पे हमारे सेंसेस हमको कंट्रोल कर रहे हैं कि आज ये करने का मन कर रहा है, आज जिम जाने का मन नहीं कर रहा है, आज समोसा खाने का मन कर रहा है। सिर्फ हम मन के मालिक हो गए हैं। मतलब हम जैसे बोलते हैं दो चीज, एक गोदास और गोस्वामी। तो गोदास कौन होता है? जो अपने गो मतलब अपने सेंसेस का दास होता है, लाइक सर्वेंट होता है। और गोस्वामी वो है जो अपने सेंसेस का कंट्रोलर है। तो हमको गोदास नहीं गोस्वामी बनना है इन द लॉन्ग रन।
एवं बुद्धे परं भूत्वा संस्थापयात्मनाम् आत्मना चाहि शत्रुं मना महाबाहो कामरूपेण दुरासदम्.
Thus, knowing oneself to be transcendental to the material senses, mind, and intelligence, O mighty armed Arjun, one should steady the mind by deliberate spiritual intelligence, Krishna consciousness, and thus, by spiritual strength, conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. इसमें बोल रहे हैं, अर्जुन को बोल रहे हैं कि स्टडी योर माइंड बाय डेलिबरेट स्पिरिचुअल इंटेलिजेंस एंड thus by spiritual strength conquer this insatiable enemy known as lust. कि ये एनिमी को कॉन्कर करने का एक ही तरीका है जो है स्पिरिचुअल स्ट्रेंथ और स्पिरिचुअल इंटेलिजेंस। Purport. This third chapter of the Bhagavad Gita is conclusively directive to Krishna consciousness by knowing oneself as the eternal servitor of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, without considering impersonal voidness, the ultimate end. In the material existence of life, one is certainly influenced by propensities for lust and desire, for dominating the resources of material nature. Desire for overlording and for sense gratification is the greatest enemy of the conditioned soul. But By the strength of Krishna consciousness, one can control the material senses, the mind, and the intelligence. One may not give up work and prescribed duties all of a sudden, but by gradually developing Krishna consciousness, one can be situated in a transcendental position without being influenced by the material senses and the mind, by steady intelligence directed towards one's pure identity. This is the sum total of this chapter. In the immature stage of material existence, philosophical speculations and artificial attempts to control the senses by the so called practice of yogic postures can never help a man toward spiritual life. He must be trained in Krishna consciousness by higher intelligence. Thus end the Bhaktivedanta purport to the third chapter of the Srimad Bhagavad Gita in the matter of Karma Yoga or the discharge of one's prescribed duties in Krishna consciousness. With that, chapter 3 complete हो गया है.
श्रीभगवानुवाच इमं विवस्वस्ते योगं प्रोक्तवान् अहम् अव्ययम् विवस्वान् मनवे प्राह मनुरीश्वरकवे ब्रवीत्.
The personality of Godhead, Lord Shri Krishna said, I instructed this imperishable science of yoga to the sun god Vivaswan, and Vivaswan instructed it to Manu, the father of mankind, and Manu in turn instructed it to Ikshvaku. Herein we find the history of the Bhagavad Gita traced from a remote time when it was delivered to the royal order of all planets, beginning from the sun planet. The kings of all planets are specially meant for the protection of the inhabitants, and therefore the royal order should understand the science of Bhagavad Gita in order to be able to rule the citizens and protect them from material bondage to lust. Human life is meant for cultivation of spiritual knowledge in eternal relationship with the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And the executive heads of all states and all planets are obliged to impart this lesson to the citizens by education, culture, and devotion. In other words, the executive heads of all states are intended to spread the science of Krishna consciousness so that the people may take advantage of this great science and pursue a successful path, utilizing the opportunity of the human form of life. In this millennium, the sun god is known as Vivasan, the king of the sun, which is the origin of all planets within the solar system. In the Brahma Samhita, it is stated, let me worship, Lord Brahma said, the Supreme Personality of Godhead Govinda, who is the original person and under whose order the sun, which is the king of all planets, is assuming immense power of heat. The sun represents the eye of the Lord and traverses its orbit in obedience to his order. The sun is taking the planets, and the sun god, at present of the name Vivasan, rules the sun planet, which is controlling all other planets by supplying heat and light. He is rotating under the order of Krishna, and Lord Krishna originally made Vivasan his first disciple to understand the science of Bhagavad Gita. The Gita is not, therefore, a speculative treatise for the insignificant mundane scholar, but is the standard book of knowledge coming down from the immemorial. In the Mahabharata, Santi Parva 348.51-52, we can trace out the history of Gita as follows. In the beginning of the millennium known as Treta Yuga, this science of the relationship with the Supreme was delivered by Vivasan to Manu. Manu, being the father of mankind, gave it to his son Maharaja Ikshvaku, the king of his earth planet and forefather of the Raghu dynasty in which Lord Ramchandra appeared. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita existed in the human society from the time of Maharaja Ikshvaku. At the present moment, we have just passed through 5,000 years of Kali Yuga, which lasts 4,32,000 years. Before this, there was Dwapar Yuga, 8 lakh years, and before that, there was Treta Yuga, which was 12 lakh years. Thus, some 2,05,000 years ago, Manu spoke the Bhagavad Gita to his disciple and son Maharaja Ikshvaku, the king of his planet Earth. The age of the current Manu is calculated to last some 30,53,000, नहीं और भी ज़्यादा है, 305 lakhs 300 years, 1,000 years, of which 120,400,000 have passed. Accepting that before the birth of Manu, the Gita was spoken by the Lord to his disciple, the sun god Vivasan. A rough estimate is that the Gita was spoken at least 120 400,000 years ago. And in the human society, it has been extant for 2 million years. It was re-spoken by the Lord again to Arjun about 5,000 years ago. That is the rough estimate of the history of Gita according to Gita itself and according to the version of the speaker, Lord Shri Krishna. It was spoken to the sun god Vivasan because he is also a Kshatriya and is the father of all Kshatriyas who are descendants of the sun god or the Surya Vamsa Kshatriya. Because Bhagavad Gita is as good as the Vedas, being spoken by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, this knowledge is apayurasya, superhuman. Since the Vedic instructions are accepted as they are without human interpretation, the Gita must therefore be accepted without mundane interpretation. The mundane wranglers may speculate on the Gita in their own ways, but that is not Bhagavad Gita as it is. Therefore, Bhagavad Gita has to be accepted as it is from the disciple succession, and it is described herein that Lord spoke to the sun god spoke to Manu, and Manu spoke to his son Ikshvasu.
ऐसा बोलते हैं कि जो भगवत गीता है इट इज मेड फॉर द किंग्स। जैसे पुराने जो टाइम में थे, जो किंग्स थे वो एक्चुअली पहले बहुत एजुकेट होते होते थे ऑन दीज सब्जेक्ट्स, ताकि वो ही अपने बाकी प्रजा को ये सारे ज्ञान दे सके इन द वे दे वुड कंडक्ट देमसेल्व्स। तो जैसे जो एक विवासवान है, सन गॉड है वो, और वो सारे प्लैनेट्स के राजा हैं। उन्होंने ये नॉलेज दिया मनु को, द फादर ऑफ मैनकाइंड, और मनु ने ये नॉलेज दिया इक्ष्वाकु को, जो रघु मतलब डायनेस्टी में राम जी के फोर फादर है। तो ये जो नॉलेज है त्रेता युग से एग्जिस्टेंट है।
तो कृष्णा ने विवासन को दिया तो कृष्णा पहले हुए ना, इसका मतलब
ये सब साइक्लिक है। जैसे सतयुग, त्रेता युग, द्वापर युग, कलयुग, वापस सतयुग, त्रेता युग, द्वापर युग, कलयुग। तो ये काल का चक्र चलता रहता है। तो इसलिए इसके हम उसमें ना जाके सिर्फ हमको ये समझना है कि गीता एग्जिस्टेड फ्रॉम द टाइम इममेमोरियल। ऐसा नहीं कि अभी 5,000 साल पहले ही आई है, हमेशा थी। और ये भी बात बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है कि कैसे किंग्स को ये चीजें समझना बहुत इंपॉर्टेंट है। जैसे किंग हो गए, आज के जमाने में हमारे प्राइम मिनिस्टर हो गए, क्योंकि तभी ये सब चीजें जनरल पब्लिक भी एक्चुअली उनको मिलेगी ये सब चीजें।
एवं परंपरा प्राप्तम इमाम राजर्षयो विदु सकालेन महता योग नष्ट परंतपः.
This supreme science was thus received through the chain of disciplic succession, and the saintly kings understood it in that way. But in course of time, the succession was broken, and therefore the science as it appears to be lost. It is clearly stated that the Gita was especially meant for the saintly kings because they were to execute its purpose in ruling over the citizens. Certainly, Bhagavad Gita was never meant for the demonic persons who would dissipate its value for no one's benefit and would diverse all types of interpretations according to personal whims. As soon as the original purpose was scattered by the motives of the unscrupulous commentators, there arose the need to re establish the disciplic succession. 5,000 years ago, it was detected by the Lord Himself that the disciplic succession was broken, and therefore He declared that the purpose of the Gita appeared to be lost. In the same way, at the present moment, also there are so many editions of the Gita, especially in English, but almost all of them are not according to the authorized disciplic succession. There are innumerable interpretations rendered by different mundane scholars, but almost all of them do not accept the supreme personality of Godhead. Krishna, although they may Krishna, although they make a good business on the words of Sri Krishna. This spirit is demonic. Before demons do not believe in God, but because the demons do not believe in God, but simply enjoy the property of the Supreme. Since there is great need of edition of the Gita in English, as it is received by the Parampara system, an attempt is made herein to fulfill this great want. Bhagavad Gita accepted as it is great boon to humanity. But if
it is accepted as a treatise of philosophical speculations. It is simply waste of time.
अब इसमें रीजन बताया है कि अर्जुन को फिर से गीता बताने की जरूरत क्या पड़ गई, क्योंकि जो डिसिप्लिक सक्सेशन था वो ब्रेक हो गया, तो लोग अपना मिलावट और डाइल्यूशंस कर
That's the whole point कि जो सालों से गीता गुरु शिष्य परंपरा से सीख रहे हैं, हमको उन्हीं से सीखना है। 100 ऑथर्स बैठे हैं, बेस्ट बुक्स भी बन जाती है, बट हमारे को ऐसे पे नहीं जाना है, क्योंकि जो इन्फॉर्मेशन है वो डाइल्यूट हो जाएगा।
So evayam मायातेद्या योग प्रोक्ता पुरातनः भक्तोऽसि मे सखा चेति रहस्यम हे एतत् उत्तमम्।
कृष्णा भगवान जी बता रहे हैं कि ये भगवत गीता अर्जुन को ही क्यों बताई और किसी को क्यों नहीं बताई। दो क्वालिटीज है अर्जुन में जो है कि वो उनके फ्रेंड भी है और वो उनकी डिवोटी भी है। भक्तो और सखा दोनों वर्ड्स आते हैं इस श्लोक में।
That very ancient science of relationship with the Supreme is today told by me to you, because you are my devotee as well as my friend, and can therefore understand the transcendental mystery of this science. Purport by Divine Grace Prabhupada. There are two classes of men, namely the devotee and the demon. So the Lord selected Arjuna as a recipient of the great science, owing to his being a devotee of the Lord. But for the demon, it is not possible to understand this great mysterious science. There are a number of editions in this great book of knowledge. Some of them have commentaries by the devotees, and some of them have commentaries by the demons. Commentation by the devotees is real, whereas that of the demons is useless. Arjuna accepts Sri Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and any commentary on the Gita following in the footsteps of Arjuna is real devotional service to the cause of this great science. The demonic, however, do not accept Lord Krishna as he is. Instead, they concoct something about Krishna and mislead general readers from the path of Krishna's instructions. Here is a warning about such misleading paths, and one should try to follow the disciple succession from Arjuna, and thus be benefited by this great science of Srimad Bhagavad Gita. Sri Arjuna Vacha Aparam Bhavato Janma Param Janma Vivas Vata Katham Etit Vijan Niyam Tvam Adau Proktavan Iti.
Arjuna said, the sun god Vivasan is senior by birth to you. How am I to understand that in the beginning you instructed this science to him? Arjuna is an accepted devotee of the Lord. So how could he not believe Krishna's words? The fact is that Arjuna's not inquiring for himself, but for those who do not believe in the Supreme Personality of Godhead, or for the demons who do not like the idea that Krishna should be accepted as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. For them only, Arjuna inquires on this point, as if he uh, was himself not aware of the personality of Godhead or Krishna, as it will be evident from the 10th chapter. Arjuna knew perfectly well that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the fountainhead of everything, and the last word of transcendence. Of course, Krishna also appeared as the son of Devaki on this earth. How Krishna remained the same Supreme Personality of Godhead, the eternal original person, is very difficult for an ordinary man to understand. Therefore, to clarify this point, Arjuna put this question before Krishna so that he himself could speak authoritatively. That Krishna is the supreme authority is accepted by the whole world, not only at present but from time immemorial, and the demons alone reject him. Anyway, since Krishna is the authority accepted by all, Arjuna put this question before him in order that Krishna would describe himself without being depicted by the demons, who always try to distort him in a way understandable to the demons and their followers. It is necessary that everyone, for his own interest, know the science of Krishna. Therefore, when Krishna himself speaks about himself, it is auspicious for all the worlds. To the demons, such explanation by Krishna himself may appear to be strange, because the demons always study Krishna from their own standpoint. But those who are devotees heartily welcome the statements of Krishna when they are spoken by Krishna himself. The devotees will always worship such authoritative statements of Krishna because they are always eager to know more and more about him. The atheist who consider Krishna an ordinary man may in this way come to know that Krishna is superhuman, that he is Satchit Anand Vigraha, the eternal form of bliss and knowledge, that he is transcendental, and that he is above the domination of the modes of material nature and above the influence of time and space. A devotee of Krishna like Arjuna is undoubtedly above any misunderstanding of the transcendental position of Krishna. Arjuna's putting this question before the Lord is simply an attempt by the devotee to defy the atheist attitude of persons who consider Krishna to be an ordinary human being, subject to the modes of material nature.
श्रीभगवानुवाच बहूनि व्यातिनानि जन्मानि तव च अर्जुन तानि अहं वेद सर्वाणि न त्वं वेत्थ परन्तपः.
The personality of Godhead said, "Many, many births both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot. O subduer of the enemy." Purport: in the Brahma Samiti, we have information of many, many incarnations of the Lord. It is stated there, I worship the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Govinda, Krishna, who is the original person, absolute, infallible, without beginning, although expanded into ultimated forms.
Unlimited form. He's still the same original.
Limited forms. He is still the same original, the oldest, and the person always appearing as fresh youth. Such eternal, blissful, all-knowing forms of the Lord are usually not understood by even the best Vedic scholars. They are always manifest to pure, unalloyed devotees. It is also stated in Brahma Samiti, I worship the supreme personality of Godhead, Govinda, Krishna, who is always situated in various incarnations such as Rama, Harsimha, Narsimha, and many sub-incarnations as well. But who is the original personality of Godhead known as Krishna? And who incarnates personally also? In the Vedas also, it is said that the Lord, although one without a second, manifests himself in innumerable forms. He is like the Vaidurya stone, which changes color yet remains one. All those multi-forms are understood by the pure, unalloyed devotees, but not by a simple study of the Vedas. Vedusu durlabam, a durlabam atma bhaktu. Devotees like Arjuna are constant and companions of the Lord. And whenever the Lord incarnates, the associate devotees also incarnate in order to serve the Lord in different capacities. Arjuna is one of the devotees, and in this verse, it is understood that some millions of years ago, when Lord Krishna spoke of the Bhagavad Gita to the sun god Vivaswan,
Awesome.
Arjuna in a different capacity was also present. But the difference between the Lord and Arjuna is that the Lord remembered the incident, whereas Arjuna could not remember. That that is the difference between the part and the parcel living entity and the Supreme Lord. Although Arjuna is addressed herein as the mighty hero who could subdue the enemies, he is unable to recall what had happened in the various past worlds. Therefore, a living entity, however great he may be in the material estimation, can never equal the Supreme Lord. Anyone who is constant companion of the Lord is certainly a liberated person, but he cannot be equal to the Lord. The Lord is described in the Brahma Samiti as infallible, Achyuta, which means that he never forgets himself, even though he is in material contact. Therefore, the Lord and the living entity can never be equal in all respects, even if the living entity is as liberated as Arjuna. Although Arjuna is a devotee of the Lord, he sometimes forgets the nature of the Lord. But by the divine grace, a devotee can at once understand the infallible condition of the Lord, whereas a non devotee or a demon cannot understand this transcendental nature. Consequently, these descriptions in the Gita cannot be understood by demonic brains. Krishna remembered acts which were performed by him millions of years before, but Arjuna could not, despite the fact that both Krishna and Arjuna are eternal in nature. We may also note herein that a living entity forgets everything due to his change of body, but the Lord remembers because he does not change. His Sachidananda body, he is Advaita, which means that there is no distinction between his body and himself. Everything in relation to him is spirit, whereas the conditioned soul is different from his material body. And because the Lord's body and self are identical, his position is always different from that of the ordinary living entity. Even when he descends to the material platform, the demons cannot adjust themselves to this transcendental nature of the Lord, which is the Lord himself explains in the following verse.
तो बेसिकली अर्जुन ने जब पूछा कि अरे मतलब विवासवान मतलब सूर्य देव तुमसे पहले आए हैं, तो तुमने कैसे ये साइंस बताया है उनको? तो इसमें कृष्णा बोल रहे हैं कि बहुत बर्थ्स लिए हैं मैंने और तुमने, लेकिन आई कैन रिमेम्बर ऑल ऑफ देम बट यू कैन नॉट, क्योंकि अर्जुन हैज चेंज्ड हिज बॉडी, बट गॉड की तो वही सच्चिदानंद रूप होता है.
When Ramji came, Hanumanji also came. Ramji again Vishnu, Hanumanji again Shivji. So again Bhakt of Vishnu. So whenever jab Bhagwan aayenge, this is a very important line in this whole shloka. Whenever Lord incarnates, the associate devotees also incarnate. जब कृष्ण आएंगे अर्जुन आएंगे, कृष्ण विष्णु आएंगे तो जैसे हनुमान जी आएंगे तो
अजोपि सन अव्यक्त्यात्मा भूतानाम ईश्वरोऽपि सन प्रकृतिं स्वयं अधिष्ठाय संभवामि आत्ममायया.
Although I am unborn and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all living entities, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. The Lord has spoken about the peculiarity of his birth. Although he may appear like an ordinary person, he remembers everything of his many, many past births. Whereas a common man cannot remember what he has done even a few hours before. If someone is asked what he did exactly at the same time 1 day earlier, it would be very difficult for a common man to answer immediately. He would surely have to dredge his memory to recall what he was doing exactly at the same time 1 day before. And yet, men often dare claim to be God or Krishna. One should not be misled by such meaningless claims. Then again, the Lord explains his Prakriti or his form. Prakriti means nature as well as Swarupa or one's own form. The Lord says that He appears in His own body. He does not change His body as the common living entity changes from one body to another. The conditioned soul may have one kind of body in the present birth, but he has a different body in the next birth. In the material world, the living entity has no fixed body that transmigrates from one body to another. The Lord, however, does not do so. Whenever He appears, He does so in the same original body by His internal potency. In other words, Krishna appears in this material world in His original eternal form with two hands holding a flute. He appears exactly in his eternal body, uncontaminated by this material world, although he appears in the same transcendental body and is Lord of the universe. It still appears that he takes his birth like an ordinary living entity. And although his body does not deteriorate like a material body, it still appears that Lord Krishna grows from childhood to boyhood, sorry, to boyhood and from boyhood to youth. But astonishingly enough, he never ages beyond youth. At the time of the Battle of Kurukshetra, he had many grandchildren at home, or in other words, he had sufficiently aged by material calculations. Still, he looked just like a young man, 20 or 25 years old. We never see a picture of Krishna in old age because he never grows old like us. Although he is the oldest person in the whole creation, past, present, and future. Neither his body nor his intelligence ever deteriorates or changes. Therefore, it is clear that in spite of his being in the material world, he is the same unborn eternal form of bliss and knowledge, changeless in his transcendental body and intelligence. Factually, his appearance and disappearance are like the sun's rising, moving before us and then disappearing from our eyesight. When the sun is out of sight, we think that the sun is set. We think that the sun is set, and when the sun is before our eyes, we think that the sun is on the horizon. Actually, the sun is always in its fixed position, but owing to our defective insufficient senses, we calculate the appearance and disappearance of the sun in the sky. And because Lord Krishna's appearance and disappearance are completely different from that of an ordinary common living entity, it is evident that he is eternal blissful knowledge by his internal potency, and he is never contaminated by material nature. The Vedas also confirm that the Supreme Personality of Godhead is is unborn, yet he still appears to take his birth in multi manifestations. The Vedic supplementary literatures also confirm that even though the Lord appears to be taking his birth, he is still without change of body. In the Bhagavatam, he appears before his mother as Narayana with four hands and the decorations of the six kinds of full opulences. His appearance in his original eternal form is his causeless mercy bestowed upon the living entities so that they can concentrate on the Supreme Lord as He is, and not on mental concoctions or imaginations, which the impersonalist wrongly thinks the Lord's forms to be. The word Maya or Atma Maya refers to the Lord's causeless mercy. According to the Vishwa Dictionary, the Lord is conscious of all of his previous appearances and
Disappearance.
disappearances. Sorry. But a common living entity forgets everything about his past body as soon as he gets another body. He is the Lord of all living entities because he performs wonderful and superhuman activities while he is on this earth. Therefore, the Lord is always the same absolute truth and is without differentiation between his form and self or between his quality and body. A question may now be raised as to why the Lord appears and disappears in this world. This is explained in the next verse.
एंड ये श्लोक में ना एक ग्रेविटेशनल पुल जैसे हमारे मटेरियल वर्ल्ड में है, तो वैसे ही एक ग्रेविटेशनल पुल और है जो धर्म या दया या ऑस्टेरिटी मतलब पायसनेस, वो सब भी धीरे धीरे वो ग्रेविटेशनल पुल नीचे नीचे आता है, और जब वो आता है तब भगवान आते हैं. मतलब whenever there is a rise in irreligious practices.
यदा यदा हि धर्मस्य ग्लानिर्भवति भारत अभुक्त्यानाम् अधर्मस्य तदात्मनां सृजाम्यहम्.
Whenever and wherever there is a decline in religious practice, O descendant of Bharata, and a predominant rise of irreligion, at that time I descend myself. The word Srijami is significant herein. Srijami cannot be used in the sense of creation because, according to the previous verse, there is no creation of the Lord's form or body, since all of the forms are eternally existent. Therefore, Srijami means that the Lord manifests himself as he is, although the Lord appears on schedule, namely at the end of the Dwapar Yuga or of the 28th millennium of the 7th Manu in one day of Brahma. He has no obligation to adhere to such rules and regulations because he is completely free to act in many ways at his will. He therefore appears by his own will whenever there is a predominance of irreligiosity and a disappearance of true religion. Principles of religion are laid down in the Vedas, and any discrepancy in the matter of properly executing the rules of the Vedas makes one irreligious. In the Bhagavatam, it is stated that such principles are the laws of the Lord. Only the Lord can manufacture a system of religion. The Vedas are also accepted as originally spoken by the Lord himself to Brahma from within his heart. Therefore, the principles of dharma or religion are the direct orders of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Dharmam tu saksad bhagavad pranitam. These principles are clearly indicated throughout the Bhagavad Gita. The purpose of the Vedas is to establish such principles under the order of the Supreme Lord. And the Lord directly orders at the end of the Gita that the highest principle of religion is to surrender unto Him only and nothing more. The Vedic principles push one toward complete surrender unto Him, and whenever such principles are disturbed by the demonic, the Lord appears. From the Bhagavatam, we understand that the Lord Buddha is the incarnation of Krishna who appeared when materialism was rampant and materialists were using the pretext of the authority of the Vedas. Although there are certain restrictive rules and regulations regarding animal sacrifice for particular purposes in the Vedas, people of demonic tendencies still took to animal sacrifice without reference to the Vedic principles. Lord Buddha appeared in order to stop this nonsense and to establish the Vedic principles of non violence. Therefore, each and every avatar or incarnation of the Lord has a particular mission, and they all described in the revealed scriptures. No one should be accepted as an avatar unless he is referred to by the scriptures. It is not a fact that the Lord appears only on Indian soil. He can manifest himself anywhere and everywhere, and whenever he desires to appear. In each and every incarnation, he speaks as much about religion as can be understood by the particular people under their particular circumstances. But the mission is the same, to lead people to God consciousness and obedience to the principles of religion. Sometimes he descends personally, and sometimes he sends his bona fide representative in the form of his son or servant or himself in some disguised form. The principles of the Bhagavad Gita were spoken to Arjun and, for that matter, to other highly elevated persons because he was highly advanced compared to the ordinary persons in other parts of the world. 2 plus 2 equals 4 is a mathematical principle that is true in the beginner's arithmetic class and in the advanced class as well. Still, there are higher and lower mathematics in all incarnations of the Lord. Therefore, the same principles are taught, but they appear to be higher and lower in varied circumstances. The higher principles of religion begin with the acceptance of the 4 orders of the 4 statuses of social life, as will be explained later. The whole purpose of the mission of incarnations is to arouse Krishna consciousness everywhere. Such consciousness is manifest and non-manifest only under different circumstances. मतलब इसमें बताया है कि कृष्णा जैसे बोलते हैं हम द्वापर में आते हैं या राम जी त्रेता में आते हैं, तो हाँ इनका स्केड्यूल है, लेकिन वो फिर भी whenever and wherever at their own will आ सकते हैं. जैसे प्रहलाद महाराज को बचाने आए थे नरसिम्हा खंबे में से, रावण को मारने आए थे राम. तो जब उनको लगेगा कि रिलीजन बहुत ज्यादा बढ़ रहा है तो वो अवतारित होते हैं.
प्रैक्टिकल रेफरेंस ऑफ दिस थिंग करंट में देखें आप, जैसे इसमें लिखा है ना कि ये जरूरी नहीं कि वो इंडियन सॉइल पे आएंगे. कहाँ कहाँ पर यूएस में शिवलिंग निकलता है. जो सनातनी उनको तो पता है कि यूएस क्या पूरा वर्ल्ड ही सनातन था, लेकिन फॉर द पब्लिक यूएस पे जाके क्यों शिवलिंग निकल रहा है, क्योंकि गॉड कैन अपेयर एनीवेयर. इंडियन फेस्टिवल्स की प्रोसेशंस निकल रही थी तो वहां पत्थरबाजी हुई थी, वहां इंडियन मंदिर निकले. आज की डेट में बात है ये, लाइक इन द सिटी ऑफ सांबा, कृष्णा नेवर ग्रोज ओल्ड, और वो जैसे थे वैसे ही वो हमेशा आते हैं. इस ये भी इट ऑल्सो आंसर्स के जो कृष्णा डिवोटीज हैं दे ऑलवेज लुक यंग, एज इफ द सेल्स हैव बीन कैप्चर्ड कि कृष्णा डिवोटी बन जाते हैं तो कृष्णा जैसे बन जाते हैं ना, दे नेवर ग्रो ओल्ड. उनके फेस पे जो तेज होता है वो वैसे ही रहता है हमेशा.
तो ये लिखा है ना कि ही नॉट नेसेसरी कि वो खुद ही आए, कभी रिप्रेजेंटेटिव को की ओनली मूर्ति. जैसे अगर कोई राइट गवर्नमेंट आ जाती है, आ जाता है,
राइट लीडर आ जाता है,
इस पे लेके जा रहा है. जैसे चैतन्य महाप्रभु आए थे तो वो भी अवतार है ना, वो भी.
बिल्कुल. क्योंकि कोई राइट लीडर्स आ जाते हैं, कोई राइट रिलीजियस हेड्स आ जाते हैं, तो कि जो फिर से लोगों को गाइड करते हैं, तो वही होता है ना, उनके थ्रू आ रहे हैं सब कुछ.
राइट.
गीता इज सो रिलेटेबल इन टुडेस टाइम आल्सो. सो नाइस. थैंक यू सो मच.
आपने मूवी देखी थी ना नरसिम्हा?
हाँ.
तो वो सतयुग की बात है.
हाँ.
जब नरसिम्हा सतयुग में आए थे,
करेक्ट.
फिर त्रेता युग में राम जी आए थे, द्वापर में कृष्ण आए थे, और कहते कल की आएंगे इन कलयुग.
ओके. नाइस.
Okay, everyone, thank you so much for joining and looking
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank